At last, South Africa has its inaugural wine of origin Swartland Pinot Noir. The 2025 vintage was the year that viticultural maverick Johan Stompie Meyer finally harvested and bottled Pinot Noir from his very own estate of Platteklip at roughly 800 meters above sea level in the rather magical wine ward of Piketboerberg on the very northern end of the Swartland. Now, whether or not the 2025 vintage Pinot Noir will make it to market, we're just not sure, because no one has produced Pinot from this sort of climate before, and I think Johan is probably a little hesitant to release it without first giving it due consideration. But it is a milestone and landmark moment for Swartland wine, nevertheless. I've often described Piketboerberg as a sort of Mad Max-ish landscape of apocalyptic proportions. But it's almost impossible to grasp the full intensity of the situation until you are actually standing there aghast, watching Pinot Noir vines trying to claw their way through unadulterated mother rock. Stompie tells the story of how, when he first visited the property, the estate agent told him that there had been two farmers previously who had bought the land, tried to farm stuff, and then sold it because, to quote them both, there is nothing there but rock. Now, Stompie, for his part, didn't care about the quantity of rock. He was more concerned with what type of rock was there. And so when he arrived to survey the land, he began clambering aimlessly through this dry scrub in order to try and see what soil lay beneath it all. And the way he tells it is the first thing he managed to touch that wasn't a thorn bush or dry twigs was a piece of coffee clip, which is a really iron-rich rock that in a couple of 100 million years will become this beautiful iron-rich soil, which for Stompie Meyer is absolute pure gold. So he didn't care that it was still solid rock. He just knew that he wanted the land that lay around it. And so roughly a decade later, it is supremely gratifying to see the majestic way that his vision is unfolding at Platteklip Vineyards. I've talked about it elsewhere, but one of the wines he's producing is possibly the craziest high-altitude, cool climate Sauvignon Blanc that you ever will see, made with fruit from vines that are growing in this Mars-like alien rocky landscape. I mean, just take a look at that soil, if you can call it that. And the wine that came from those vines is unlike anything that I've tasted. So today we have the joy of continuing to talk about Johan Stompie Meyer, but we will not be tasting his Platteklip wines. Rather, we are tasting the Mother Rock Carbonic Cuvée Pinot Noir made with fruit from Elgin. And this is one of the few wines that we've featured two vintages in a row, purely because A, it is so distinctive, and B, because it forms such an important part of the broader expression of what Pinot Noir can be in South Africa. In other videos, we go into detail about the difference between full carbonic maceration and semi-carbonic maceration, and how 9 wines out of 10 are going to be semi-carbonic maceration because you get some of the same flavor effects as a full carbonic maceration, but with none of the ridiculously finicky labor. Stompie, being the slightly contrarian character that he is, has gone and done the complete opposite of that. Because this carbonic cuvée is very definitely 100% textbook full carbonic maceration with all of the extra manual labor that goes along with it. And yet the wine features none of the tutti frutti bubblegummy flavors that made this technique famous in the first place. When the grapes reach the cellar, they're placed very gently into a tank, and then dry ice is placed in there, and then grapes, and then more dry ice, making very sure that none of the grapes are burst. Then the CO2 pushes the oxygen out and the tank is sealed, making sure that not one iota of oxygen is left inside there. Once that's happened, once the tank is sealed, it is not touched until all of the free-run juice has fermented dry. And what I mean by free-run juice, well, it is purely the juice that is released when the grapes burst spontaneously, all on their own, without any pressure or intervention from Johan, because of that internal pressure that happens during carbonic maceration when CO2 is delivered as a byproduct to the fermentation. But here's the kicker. Having gone through all that trouble of what is really a very arduous winemaking process, which is known to deliver a very distinct set of flavors, Johan then aggressively aerates the wine, which completely blows off all those flavors. You might think that's madness, man. Why would you do that all? And the answer is simply because what Stompie wants is to have the very gentle, silky, tannic nature of a carbonic maceration wine without any of the tutti frutti, bubblegum, candy-like notes that come along with it. The reason for this is because Stompie set out to make a Pinot Noir with the benefits of carbonic maceration, as opposed to a carbonic maceration wine that is made with some of the benefits of Pinot Noir. Put another way, he wants you to taste the grape. He wants you to taste the cultivar characteristics of Pinot Noir, but without the distraction of tannins. So let's get into the glass and see if he's achieved his goal. So when we give it a sniff, well, I wouldn't call it classic Pinot Noir, but it certainly is curious enough to keep me going back for more. Actually, now that I think about it, perhaps it's a little more classic than I thought. I mean, the first notes that come to mind are red licorice, hints of musk and mushroom. And I guess those are well within the parameters for a classic Pinot Noir. But there are a couple of other elements in there as well. There's plum taffy and there's creamy strawberry chewing candy. So he doesn't avoid the carbonic notes altogether. But I'm definitely not complaining because it's absolutely beguiling. So when we give it a sip, well, when it comes to the palate, the notes that we encounter first really are supremely primary and pure, and that is wild, sour red cherry and blood orange. So in that sense, what you meet first is Pinot Noir, the grape. But then, as happens on the aromas, there are sweeter, slightly candied elements that actually come in and soften that and balance it out beautifully. When it comes to discussing the structure, well, there are some youthful tannins and they're pretty grippy, but delightfully on the tail, you'll notice that those plum elements and cherry elements and citrus elements outlast the structure or tannin of the wine. And so what you're left with is a hugely moreish, juicy finish of those berries and citrus that I mentioned. Your parting thought as those flavors fade will almost certainly be, let's have another sip. Right, so that's all I have time for today. But I have left links to 2 videos. One of them talks about the world of carbonic maceration pinotage in Stellenbosch, and the other video goes into a little more detail on the process through which Stompie purchased Platteklip vineyards. Both of those videos will give you a little more context and enable you to appreciate this wine even more.